And we are live.
Episode 11, Navigating Injuries and the Impact on Sports Performance. This was actually a question that we had last week. We were doing our Q&A, and one of the questions was how to minimize injuries.
Yeah.
And it was one of those questions that we talk about that people ask as a matter of fact, as if there's a quick answer. And there's absolutely no quick answer
No.
to injuries. With injury trends going up, we just decided that we would do an entire episode on injuries and how to minimize that. As a parent, the most important thing for me, for my kids, is outside of them having fun and growing, is I don't want my kids to get hurt, right?
Yeah.
So whatever your kid's playing, whether it's Pop Warner, whether it's baseball and they're having to deal with elbow issues, or maybe basketball they're dealing with ankle or knee problems, doesn't really matter the sport. One thing that nobody wants is you to be hurt. I remember even in high school when I used to play basketball, if the star athlete on the other team was injured,
Oh yeah.
even then I was just like, oh yeah, it's not as cool. Like even my arch enemies, right? My rival schools, I didn't even want them to be injured. So injuries is like one of those things that nobody wants. You don't want it for your obviously as a parent, you don't want it for your kids, right?
Yeah.
You don't want your kids to be hurt. Um, but we hate injuries so much that we don't even want our opponents to be hurt, right?
Yeah.
Um, so we're gonna dive deep into the topic of injuries. We're gonna talk about what causes injuries, why we feel the injuries has become an epidemic, um, and then what we can do to mitigate the damage, because there is a lot of damage, and those injuries aren't just physical; those injuries extend to mental.
Oh yeah.
It's a big problem. It really is.
This is probably one of my favorite conversations to have just because like my personal experience within it. Because that's why I started working with you, was because of an injury that happened because of things that, looking back now, I'm like, I see the issues within certain areas, whether it's weight room or the training methods. So that's what we really want to dive into today, is how can we navigate around these injuries, but also how does it affect our athletes and what can we do about that for when it does happen?
Yeah. And obviously if you're injured, you can't help your team. So there's a big cost there, right? You're not developing, right? You're not helping your team. You're not available. It's just really bad. So I figured it would be appropriate, since we're talking about injuries and how it affects performance. Um, I want to go over the cost of it first. And I'm talking about the costs relative to your own development.
Yeah.
You take an injury. So let's take name any injury, a minor injury. Name a minor injury.
Ankle roll,
Okay, so
brain.
let's say we got an ankle sprain, right? Ankle sprain, typically it can take, let's say a week or two, depending on the severity of your ankle sprain. It can take a
Yeah.
week or two to heal up. If it's a high ankle sprain, that could be 4 to 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So the immediate cost of the injury, especially depending on when that injury is happening, in season, off season, is that you're going to be a lesser version of yourself,
Yeah.
right? Most athletes don't take the time off, to allow the injury to heal properly.
Yeah.
So what happens is you take an ankle sprain where it takes, I don't know, 2, 3 weeks to heal. High ankle sprain, 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks. And all this time that let's do the first scenario, the athlete that's actually rehabbing and doing it the right way, right?
Yeah.
You're taking all this time to rehab. So let's say that 4 to 6 weeks, or let's say it's even 3 weeks
Yeah.
to get back to quote unquote normal. The reality, when we use the word normal, it simply means back to like baseline mobility. Like there's no pain, there's no inflammation, ranges of motion are restored.
Yeah.
So that's where a PT or a trainer, they might say, okay, you're cleared, you're ready to go back, you're good. And then the athlete gets back on the field, gets back on the court, and they go, wait a second, I don't feel good. But they told me I'm good.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why. Even if it's something as short as like 2 or 3 weeks of rehabbing an injury, during that 2 to 3 weeks of rehab, guess what we're not doing? We're not developing. We're not
Yeah.
building up.
Oh yeah.
So that 2 to 3 weeks of rehab, you're losing a certain baseline of fitness, right? You're losing some attributes.
Yeah.
So now, how long does it take to retrieve those attributes?
Yeah.
Let's call it another 2 to 3 weeks. My math is going to be a little hazy simply because the injuries are different. So I'm just giving some basic math, right?
Yeah.
So 2 to 3 weeks to rehab. Then we have, let's get back to baseline. So
Yeah.
now that's 6 weeks, right?
Consider that like the average math of everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now in 6 weeks, now you're back to a true normal. You're cleared at 3 weeks where they say you're normal. They say you're good. Really, we all know you're not good. That just means you're well enough to
Yeah.
get back to activity, right? You can resume activity. And then the timeline gets doubled because of what? You're trying to get back to your actual normal,
Yeah.
right? But now the way I look at it is now all of a sudden that 2 week injury was actually 6 weeks.
And that's if it's in season, that's 6 games you probably just missed, right?
But that's also assuming the person's rehabbing
And doing things.
correctly. So this is a scenario where the person is doing things the right way. How about scenario B? Same injury, ankle sprain. Now we go, oh shoot, let's do some heavy taping. Maybe they do some ice and heat, the old school rice technique, rest, ice, compression, elevation. Maybe pop a couple ibuprofens and they say, get back out there.
Yeah.
So now this person's ankle went from 100% to, let's call it, I don't know, 60%.
Yeah.
And now this athlete is so tough, right? Because there are a lot of athletes who are tough. They can play hurt. But now when you're playing hurt, that leads to playing injured. Because now all of a sudden, let's say that 2 week ankle sprain, that's a low to mild ankle sprain, has now turned into a high grade ankle sprain.
Yeah.
Now that tough athlete, and I've seen, this is not a scenario I'm making up. This is a scenario I've actually seen play out. Unfortunately, I've seen it play out many times. Now, all of a sudden, that 2 week injury actually turned into 6 weeks. Now they can't play at all.
Yeah.
Now, the original timeline, we're going to take that timeline. Now it's based off of a 6 week timeline. Now this athlete has to take 6 weeks to rehab and then another 6 weeks to return back to what? Normal. So that means that's 12 weeks to get back to where he would have been in the beginning.
That's 12 weeks of games or development all completely missed.
Which means to get 12 weeks of development, you have to add that in now. So it's actually what? 24 weeks. Because let's say you take a healthy person. So let's say I'm the healthy person. Let's say you're the injured person.
Yeah.
And you have that high ankle sprain, which is going to take you 12 weeks. Well, during that 12 weeks that you are trying to get back to normal, I have 12 weeks of development.
Yeah.
So when it's all said and done, I'm not going to be 12 weeks ahead of you. I'm going to be 24 weeks ahead of you. So that's called injury math.
Yeah. It's much better to just suck it up, take the heat from the coaches if the coaches are like that, and then just get back and recover, knowing what can happen if it goes the wrong way, you coming back too soon.
Correct. So I remember years ago, I heard that scenario get explained to me, how it's like, wait a second, it's not a week. It's not 2 weeks. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, when you get cleared and they say you're good, no one's ever good.
Yeah.
That just means you're cleared to return back to basketball activities or football activities or whatever the sport is, right? So the second issue that I think we run into as athletes is that the clearance that typically is done by let's say a PT, for example, they're using protocols based off of a normal human, not protocols based off of, let's say, for example, me doing jujitsu. So when last year I had a pretty bad elbow injury, rock climbing, fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
You've told you that story. I was in Hawaii climbing, grabbed what I thought was grip, and there was sand there. And then I fell probably, I have a picture, I have it on video, 20 plus feet. No idea how I didn't break stuff. No idea how I didn't die. It was just a crazy story. But besides the fact, my elbow got injured pretty bad. This was May of last year. I'm still probably I'm probably about 80% right now, but
Okay.
it's been 8 months,
Yeah.
right? But I remember like my function, my joint function, my ability to pronate my elbow, supinate my elbow, extend, flex, all of my baseline range of motion, it's back. And to be honest, that was back within probably like 2 months.
Yeah.
So if I would have seen a regular PT, and they would have been like, okay, Henry, you're good now. But would the clearance be for a jujitsu elbow? Because when someone's trying to hyperextend my elbow with their body and they're pinning my arm with their legs or
Yeah.
whatnot, they're someone's trying to put me in an arm bar. The amount of stress that my elbow is receiving is completely different from a person who doesn't use their elbow that way.
Yeah.
So the clearance with most, I'm not saying all, but I'm going to say most traditional PTs, if they don't fully understand the demands of the sport, then they're going to clear you early, right? I work with a lot of baseball players. I've talked about me working with baseball players for a very long time. And I know with baseball players, they will get cleared from their elbow and their shoulder injuries. And then the baseball player goes and throws a ball after they were told that they're good to go. And they go, oh man, it hurts really bad. I actually had a story. I was working with a pitcher from UNLV, and he was having such severe pain in his elbow. He he had done some rehab, and when he got cleared, he was so excited. He goes, "Man, I'm gonna go throw." He didn't even throw hard. He had a
Yeah.
light throwing session, right? And then he started getting crazy pain to the point where he freaked out. Him and his dad took him in. They got some MRIs on the spot. You know, MRIs
Yeah.
aren't cheap, right? It's like $500 for an MRI. And then they looked at the elbow, and structurally, they're like, "You're good. There's nothing wrong with it in the MRI." And then he was just like freaking out, like, then why am I having so much pain? He actually thought, because he said he was throwing a ball and he heard a pop. And then he started having a lot of pain. He goes, oh, I think I tore my elbow, tore my UCL. The MRI shows he's good. Structurally, everything was sound. So essentially, his nervous system was misfiring. So the person, I don't know who his PT was. I don't know um, what he used to clear him. But what I do know is that he was cleared to throw, and he goes, I'm not ready to throw. Right.
Yeah.
So the PT saw something that said, thumbs up, you're good to go, have fun. And then after a couple sessions, he's like, man,
Oh yeah, because I feel like the PT's job isn't. I mean, it depends, right? If they're hired on to be part of the sports team and stuff like in a professional manner, obviously the PT has to understand
correct.
the demands.
Sports
But we're
PT.
talking about high schoolers, right? And these PTs are just normal doctors that they're going to. They're talking to. If they know about the sport, they might be able to clear them and say, "Hey, no, you need a little bit longer." But again, like you said, if they don't, so what does the normal clearing for a PT look like? Is it just, hey, you have great function in your mobility again, and you have decent amount of strength, you're good to go, or what would you say is like, and then how do you determine that as
I
an
can't
athlete?
I can't speak for any I can't speak for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's different. A PT, a DPT, an athletic trainer, like what protocols are they using? I don't know. General ones that I know people care about, like in the first phase of an injury, they want to deal with inflammation, and essentially they want a person to be asymptomatic. I know for me, when I'm working with somebody who's injured, there's three things that I focus on. In the beginning, phase one, I call it of restoring mobility and function, is making them asymptomatic, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I have a lot of clients that I work with that have degeneration in their lower back,
Yeah.
degeneration in their knees, and some of them don't have meniscus. So I have clients I work with that literally structurally are not sound and they're chronic. So in the beginning, it's like, okay, let's get you to be asymptomatic.
Yeah.
So asymptomatic simply means that they feel normal even though they're not normal. So in this case, with the pitcher that I was talking about, he was symptomatic. He structurally was fine, but he had symptoms in his elbow of intense pain, even though
Yeah.
structurally he was fine, right? So phase one for me is I want them to feel good because the barrier to rehab is we got to be able to get them to move, right?
Yeah.
But if a person feels pain when they're moving, then guess what they don't want to do? Move.
Yeah.
So we have to number one restore, get them asymptomatic, reduce inflammation. That's why people will use techniques like the rice technique. You know, oh, you sprained your ankle. Let's put some ice on it. Let's put some heat on it. Let's get the inflammation. Let's manage inflammation and
Yeah.
pain. Phase two of rehab is restoring function. So that would be your baseline range of motion, your mobility, your flexibility. I want to make sure that so if let's say for example it's an ankle sprain, I want to make sure that you have good inversion in your ankle, you have good eversion. I want to make sure you have good dorsiflexion. I want to make sure you have good plantar flexion. I want to make sure that the ankle feels good
Yeah.
in all ranges of motion. I want to
Yeah.
make sure that the joint capsule is healthy. I want joint capsule. I just want to make sure there's wiggle room in the joint, right? So, phase one, I want to get them asymptomatic. Phase two, I want to restore function in that joint. And then phase three, this is my belief, it's my favorite one. It's the performance side of rehab. It's where now let's get you an athletic ankle. Where I feel a lot of people will stop rehab is they will stop at phase two. A lot of it is because of red tape. So let's say, depending on what kind of insurance you have, the insurance company will say, "Hey, we approve 8 sessions." Well, guess what? You're cleared at 8 sessions because that's all that the insurance company will get paid
Gotcha.
for.
Yeah.
So some of them will prescribe a little longer, but then you got to pay out of pocket. And at that point, people are like, "Well, I was paying $20 out of pocket for my copay. Now I
Yeah.
got to pay $150 an hour for that same session, and it didn't do much for me." Um, so a lot of people just stop their rehab early. Either A, people get cleared early, or B, people just for financial reasons they will stop their rehab early, right?
Yeah.
So I feel in phase two where we're restoring ranges of motion, that is the phase where I feel a lot of people will get cleared, hence they will get re-injured, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, injuries, they're trying to get you back to normal,
Whatever an average normal is.
whatever an average normal is. Or even if it's your own normal. Let's say,
Yeah.
for example, it's your own normal. You're like, oh, I can cut, I can jump, I can do all those things again. But one thing that we have to understand, this is something I learned years ago, and I remember when the first time I learned this, I've never turned back from it. It was that normal is where you got hurt. So if normal is where you were at when the injury occurred, then why would I want to get you normal?
Take you above it.
I want to change your baseline. I want to exceed the threshold that you're at and create a new normal. So creating a new normal, that would be phase three, which is I call it the performance side of rehab, where now it's like, how much stress can your ankle tolerate? How much stress can your elbow tolerate when it's pronating and you're throwing a baseball? How much, extension does your lumbar spine have when you're doing a double leg takedown, you're throwing and you're lifting somebody up? So phase phase three of rehab, there is no ceiling because strength is infinite, right?
Yeah.
right? There's infinite ways we can make somebody stronger. So where I feel people will do bad on their rehab is that they either like I said, they stop early, whatever the reason may be, whether it's financial reasons or the insurance company wouldn't approve any more sessions. And then they don't do performance rehab where they're actually trying to create a new norm. And here's the thing too, when it comes to rehab, this is I find there's a lot of holes in rehab. And one of them is actually the frequency of rehab. So let's say, for example, David, you get injured and you go through the proper channels through your insurance, and I'm like, hey, pro athletes, they're getting rehab
Yeah.
2 to 3 times a day. They're getting 2 to 3 sessions a day if they're injured. And now imagine you call up, I don't know, Kaiser or whoever you have, and you're like, can I get rehab approved twice a day, 6 days a week? It's funny, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because the reason it's funny is because we know what's going to happen. They're gonna laugh about it. They're gonna be like, "Sir, do you mean twice a week?" You're like, "No, I need it twice a day. I need it all day, every day, 6 days a week, 5 days a week." They're gonna laugh at you, right? Because there's no insurance company on the planet that will do that level of rehab.
Yeah.
However, rehab is a full-time job. So if you take LeBron James, you take Stephen Curry, you take Patrick Mahomes, you take any athlete, they get injured, you're going to tell me they're doing rehab twice a week?
The whole day is rehab.
Yeah, the whole day is rehab. Now, or people will argue is like, well, they're getting paid to, to throw a football.
Yeah.
That's their job. And you are correct. However, it doesn't change the rules of biology, right?
Yeah.
So with rehab is no different than strength, right? So strength, we have something called the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. All that means is that if you incrementally stress the body, it will get stronger. No different than if I want to increase my bench press. I don't go, oh, I want to bench 400 pounds. Let me start with 400. I'd sound like an idiot, right? I say, let me learn how to pick up the bar. Let me start with the plate. Let me go 200 pounds, 250. And then over time, my body adapts to that load and I'm able to handle a bigger load.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So law of adaptation, SAID principle, same thing. Rehab is the same way. Oh, this is your tolerance. We're going to figure out where you're at and we're going to be really close to that baseline. And then we're going to bump it up just a little bit. We're going to find out just the right amount of stress where it's going to promote an adaptation, i.e. strength gain. So with rehab, we need to treat rehab the same way we treat strength. And we don't. And athletes, they understand this, right? Because they understand the demands of their sport. Like you said, Patrick Mahomes, he's going to have a medical team, right? That's going to give him treatment. These guys are getting treatment like right after the game.
Yeah.
Literally. If I knew that, right after I'm done throwing a ball, someone's going to go, I'm going to get a sports massage immediately after my pitching lesson. It's like, it changes things, right?
Yeah.
So, but the thing is that you need high frequency of reps. You need high frequency of stress, not in volume, in frequency, right? So, because what happens is when you have high volume on anything, you develop efficient motor skills, right?
Yeah.
So if I have an ankle injury, a knee injury, a hip injury, a back injury, it doesn't really matter what the injury is. I need to restore function, but I also got to restore neurological control over that part of my body. I got to have the motor skill of being able to control that body part.
Yeah.
Right. Motor efficiency is part of rehab. And just like any other skill, motor skill, if I want to get good at shooting 3-pointers, I need a lot of volume. I need a lot of reps. Right. Yeah. So rehab's the same way. So one of the gaps that I found in rehab is that, number one, we already talked about the insurance companies, how they operate. They're not going to give you rehab 2-3 times a day.
Yeah.
Right. So the question becomes, what do we do? I'm not LeBron James. I don't have $2 million a year.
How do we work around the fact what the insurance gives us? And
Yeah.
how do we know what we need to do?
It's so funny. I saw somebody make a post, and they were talking about all the treatments they do, from spinal decompressions, red light therapy, sports massage, peptides, uh, TRT. Like they're doing, like it was
Yeah.
this crazy list, and they're like, this is what I got to do. And I started thinking about that. I was like, wait a second. You're talking about between $5,000 to $10,000 a month worth of like rehab. How many people off the top of your head do you know can just be like, oh yeah, let me just go fork out an extra 5 or 10 grand a month to to take care of my
I'll
body,
just get rid of my whole monthly paycheck
right?
on rehab.
Or
Yeah.
even frequency of training, right? Like I have a few clients that train often. I'm like, hey, that's awesome. People ask me all the time, how do I get the best results? I say, you got to train often. You got to train a lot. If you want faster results, train more. And I've had a few clients that will train more, but they're paying upwards of $1,000 a month. How many people can actually do that?
Yeah.
Right. So the question becomes, I have a 15-year-old athlete, I have a 13-year-old athlete, he's injured. What do we do? How do I approach my rehab? So one of the things that I've been doing for probably at least 10 years, I've done this actually, I've probably done it longer, but specifically with injuries, I would say about 10 years, is I do a method of coaching called self-coaching. Want to take a wild guess what self-coaching is?
They coach themselves.
Yeah. I train them in a way where they can coach themselves. You were with me before, so you saw me do that. But one of the things that I do with my athletes is, let's say my athlete sees me once a week. I tell them, hey, we need to rehab 7 days a week. Anybody who's ever trained with me, they know that I'm going to tell them, hey, you got to do this 7 days a week. You got to do X amount of reps per day. But I will always coach them on how to coach themselves.
Yeah.
On how to rehab themselves. They don't need to be on like a level of like myself or a PT. I'm not a PT. I'm not a chiro or anything.
Yeah.
But they don't have to be on that level, but they have to have baseline competence of like their anatomy. So my hip, this is a human hip. This is what a hip is supposed to do. A hip's supposed to be able to rotate in, out, flex, extend, abduct, adduct. Like they have to understand what the human hip is supposed to be able to do. So what I like to do is I will educate them on their anatomy. And now when, let's say, for example, if an athlete's hip hurts, now it leads to more questions like, when does it hurt? Where does it hurt? In what direction does it hurt? Oh, it's when I'm flexing while my hip is internally rotated. So now they show up to a session and they're giving me so much good feedback, because if I self-coach them, meaning I'm coaching them on how to coach themselves, what I'm doing, I'm educating them about their own biology. So now when they do something, they have some baseline assessments that they can do to see if they have proper function. Because one thing we know is that if the joint doesn't work the way it's supposed to, all the other tissues are going to be disorganized and they're going to be symptomatic, right?
Yeah.
Fascia, muscle tightness, all of that stuff. But if we restore function from the inside out, meaning from joint, and work our way out, then tissues will start to organize themselves. Yeah. So I think it's very important that we teach athletes about their anatomy. If they can learn about speed, they can learn how to do a power clean, they can learn how to do all these complex movements. Yeah. They can understand a playbook, a football playbook. They can learn how a hip is supposed to work.
Oh yeah.
Like, right?
Yeah.
So these athletes are very intelligent. Even to put it into perspective, my kids are 10, my 10-year-old, 10, 8, and 5, but my 10-year-old, he understands like for example, I've taught him something called CARS, control articular rotation, just pretty much how to take his joints through a full range of motion. And he understands like, oh, dad, when my arm is here, it feels tight. So then he'll start moving it more. And he's using these ranges of motion to get his body to feel good. And then he'll go throw a football and then he goes, oh, wow, my arm feels great. When I throw the football feels lighter, right? That's a 10-year-old. Yeah. So self-coaching is a style of coaching I have been using pretty much my entire career. But in rehab, we have to do the same thing. because not many people are going to say, you know what, Coach Henry, like I have like 10 grand a month. Just give me a list of all the things. I'm going to go do stem cell right after this. I'm going to go get an adjustment, plus a sports massage, plus this, plus training, plus have a dietitian. Like, come on. I've met a few, don't get me wrong. I've met very, very few, but there are people out there that, sure, if they want to invest. I literally have a client, a few clients like that they're like, my health is everything. And I agree with them, but I'm like, even me, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'd be spending that much per month on everything. Like they're getting from their food, where they get their food sources. Like they're spending a lot of money on from food to training to supplementation to like, I did some quick math in my head. I'm like, man, that's like a couple grand a month just to be healthy.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that luxury. So the next best thing is give them the tools to be able to take care of their own body. You know, so like one of the things I like to do, talking about educating athletes about their biology, is I'll teach them the difference between something structurally being wrong and neurologically being wrong.
Yeah.
So, for example, back to the pitcher.
Okay.
Structurally, he was fine. Does the MRI, they're like, dude, you're good. Right?
Yeah.
So he comes in, we look at his elbow, you know, I look at his pronation, supination, and the first thing we find is that he doesn't pronate and supinate well, and he doesn't have a lot of feel when he pronates and supinates. So essentially, nervous system was misfiring. It wasn't firing the right way.
Gotcha.
So we started doing some isometrics to generate some, you know, get some recruitment in his elbow. You know, started doing a lot of pronation, a lot of supination.
Rebuild those pathways and get them stronger.
We started rebuilding those neurological pathways. And all of a sudden, he goes, my arm feels good. I say, hey, let's do like 30%.
Yeah.
Feels good. I want you to gradually bump it up until you hit an effort where you feel like that's it. He was able to ramp up to almost a normal effort, like an 80, 85. And he goes, what the heck? And I said, you're not training your joint to move the way that it's supposed to move. So if you're forcing your body into positions and your body perceives that position or that angle or that range of motion as dangerous, then you're going to have symptoms. He goes, well, why is my body perceiving it as dangerous? I said, because your body, you don't train those positions. You don't know how to. So when you train mobility, it's not just the ability to have more range of motion, which is what most people think is like, just get looser, open things up, stretch it out, pull on it, rub on it.
Yeah.
It's the ability to train your nervous system to be able to go to length and have strength at length. So let's say, I'll give you an example. So let's say you take a baseball player, and when his arm's in layback, that's called external rotation, right?
Yeah.
When he achieves layback, you get what's called the stretch reflex, right?
Yeah.
The body will reflexively produce force out of that position. So what that essentially means is, for us to have a functioning shoulder, he needed to be able to achieve ER, layback, if you want baseball terminology, external rotation, and he had to be able to produce IR, force from ER. So I have to be able to ER, external rotation, and then produce the force to get out of the position. So I need strength to get in the position, and I need to be able to produce force to get out of the position.
Rotational power.
Right?
Yeah.
So what I did that's different with him versus I feel with a lot of rehab, because of their limitations on, oh crap, I only got 8 sessions with you. Your elbow's hurt. So they spent all the time on the elbow. Well, what I do with my rehab with athletes is I look at the whole body. I look at the system, right? So structurally, does everything move the way it's supposed to move? And interdependently, is there efficiency? Are the joints coupling properly? So what I found with him was he didn't have good shoulder internal rotation. So guess where he was picking up that extra slack? And his elbow. So his elbow was having to overly pronate to pick up the slack that his shoulder was lacking.
Was this the kid you were working on that day I was there?
I don't know. I don't remember.
How long ago was that?
This was last summer. You might have seen me training as a college kid.
Yeah, because there was another one actually last year too you had coming, because I think it might have been him. He had the the whole issues and you're going through is
If
range
you
of
see
motion.
me
Yeah.
coach a lot of baseball,
Yeah.
a lot of baseball players, so
And they all have the
they
same kind of
literally all have
tendency.
a baseball player walks in. I'm like, let me take a guess. Elbow, shoulder. They go,
Shoulder.
oh, how did you know? It's like-
It's only the most used thing in your whole body that you play in the whole
Right?
game.
So essentially the way I view rehab is I view rehab as a full body thing. So in his case, I was looking at his shoulder, I was looking at his scapula, making sure his scapula could upwardly rotate when he's in those positions. I was looking at the thoracic spine, make sure he had good thoracic extension, thoracic rotation,
Yeah.
with a bias towards the elbow. Where traditional rehab, they'll be like elbow, elbow, elbow. That's it. You sprained your ankle, you go to see your therapist, they're looking at your ankle. They're not looking at your knee, they're not looking at your hip, they're not looking at all the other structures. And I think something that everybody knows, even you don't have to be an expert to know this, is that when something in our body is wrong, our body's going to compensate. I think everybody knows this, right?
Yeah.
Your body's going to compensate. So that means if, let's say, I don't know, my shoulders hurt, well, now I have to pick up the slack somewhere. So now my body's leaking energy from somewhere, and something else is picking up that slack. So that something else is also going to get broken down.
Like knee pain. I mean, it's like pain in general. Typically when you feel pain somewhere, it's because it's having to make up and it's getting overused now and overworked because of the lack of something else. Like,
Correct.
for example, I was working with someone and they're having knee pains. I didn't even touch their knee. I had them do knee cars and stuff where I had them moving it. I just touched their hips and their ankles and it all went away because I recognized if you don't have the proper mobility in one joint as you're going on right now, everything else or the joints next to it have to compensate for the lack of it. And now they have to act like the joint that isn't working right. So if my knee's having to act like a hip, well, I got a problem.
Yeah. No, that's that. I see that all the time. So I feel like we have to have a multi-dimensional approach to getting somebody to feel better. Now, I'm not a medical professional. I'm not prescribing, telling you to do this, don't do that. I'm just telling you from my own experience and having basic understanding of the biology, understanding how the body works. I've had some pretty incredible results, almost to the extent where I have to remind people that, hey, I'm not your DPT, I'm not your PT.
Yeah.
But they will say often that, wow, this is working way better than what I was doing when I was doing my treatment.
Yeah.
So it's funny because, I didn't get into this world of to do rehab, but learning about it, I was forced to learn about it because I was like, how am I going to get someone fast who has a messed up knee? How am I going to get someone fast if their back doesn't, if they're having back pain? So I was forced to learn about this world, and now I'm fascinated by it. I really am.
Yeah.
If I can go back, maybe I would go to PT school. Maybe I would do that. But just even having some prerequisite knowledge of how the body works and understanding the physiology better, we can get people to feel better. So one thing that I have learned, and this is true across every injury I've ever worked with, is that when joints feel good, pain tends to go away.
Yeah. Going back to the PT side of it too, right? It's because I know we talked about this prior. You have the two options and the mindsets can be different with it. And I'm not saying this is for everyone, but we see it quite often sometimes. You have the doctor world, right, where they're covered by insurance. There's a sense of comfort in their area. And comfort, as great as it is, can also be bad within the learning side, because then it's, do I actually want to take the time to delve deeper into what I have, or am I comfortable with what I know right now to keep my position? Versus like in our area, right, we're not covered. We don't get the insurance. Everything's out of pocket. And for us, it's, well, we have to care about it because it's our brand, it's our business. There isn't a sense of comfort for us to have to go about it. And again, I'm not saying that for every single doctor out there, because there are people who genuinely do care, right? And they genuinely want to learn every single day and they want to keep getting better at it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with the insurance, though. It's like, sure, it's free, but it's whoever they give you. And you just are praying to God, I hope it's someone who actually cares, and that's someone who became comfortable and is still using the same techniques from so many years ago that no longer really apply to today in certain standards. So it's an unfortunate factor within it. But how can we go forward now if money is an issue? Because we keep talking about how mobility is such a thing. What kind of training does that kind of look like? Is there even an answer we can give for for the athletes who can't afford to come in, but they want to start working on their mobility? They want to start improving these functions within their body to prevent injury. What are some tips and things they can start doing now, if there's even any?
Um, well, specifics, it always depend because like I always say, it depends on the person.
In their sport
So,
too.
last week we talked about social media, how it gives people this false sense of security, right? So
Yeah.
people will, oh, back pain, and then 3 hacks on how to instantly alleviate back pain, and people post that. The reality is you do need to work with an expert. It is an unfortunate part, but if you are injured and you're truly injured, you have to work with a practitioner. You have to work with somebody who understands the demands of your sport. That's number one. And they obviously got to understand, you know, the biology. You got to have somebody with experience. Preventatively, I always say with preventing injuries, there are a lot of things we can do. So I always say the two main things that we can do to prevent injuries are improving our efficiency of movement and improving our structural integrity.
Gotcha.
Now, efficiency of movement is essentially what a lot of people are doing. So, for example, if you go see a pitching coach, they're going to go over biomechanics, meaning they're trying to figure out the most efficient way to get the most out of you while taxing the body as little as possible.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what I would assume every single coach is after. So it doesn't really matter what the sport is. If you have a good coach and they're teaching you skills, they're going to teach you ways that are going to mitigate damage, that's going to help you perform at a high level, but minimizing the effort. So that's number one, right? You have to work on efficiency, right? The second thing is you got to constantly be working on your attributes. You have to be training in the background with uh, mobility, strength, speed, anything that you don't train and then you end up getting injured because you didn't train that, that's on you.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you never train, let's say, hip mobility, and now you're playing football and you're having a cut and your hips are constantly in these weird angles and you're having to produce force out of those weird angles. But all of
Yeah.
a sudden now you valgus your knee and your ACL goes, too late, you're injured.
Yeah.
You need to train the positions that would normally create an injury. So what I like to do, which is completely opposite of traditional injury prevention, is like, let's work on being efficient. Let's learn how to be efficient. I remember in jujitsu, all the black belts will teach you how to be the most efficient with the technique,
Yeah.
right? But in that same token, all the black belts their bodies are broken. Like they've had so many injuries.
Yeah.
Like when they're rolling, I'm like, oh man, they don't even feel like they're injured. But you see them walking and, on my back, my knees, my elbows,
Yeah.
they're dealing with all these injuries. So efficiency is obviously not the only way. Look at pro athletes. They're efficient. But look at an athlete when he's 35 years old. Look at their knees.
Yeah.
So we can't just say, oh, just be efficient. At the end of the day, we have to get stronger.
Yeah.
We have to get stronger uh, at the joint level. So I want all my joints and connective tissues to feel stronger. So if you're not training those attributes, that's going to be the thing that causes you to get injured.
What we were just talking about earlier with the PT, if they get you back up to normal's where we got hurt. What I need I need the capacity of the joint of what it can take, the load, to be more efficient and more effective than what's actually required
Yeah.
at the level of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I don't want to say you can fully prevent injuries, but a lot of injuries are preventable. So,
Oh, yeah.
for example, fatigue. If you factor in fatigue, like I know in the NBA, I was reading a couple weeks ago on a case study, and they were showing that it was like over 60% of injuries happen when an athlete's in a state of fatigue. So they were third or fourth quarter.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, so can I prevent being fatigued? I can work on my conditioning,
Yeah.
right? So that's preventable. Okay. How about, if let's say I sprain my ankle, do like an inversion sprain, which is the most common form of a sprained ankle. But let's say I train my ankle to have inversion strength. Well, I land in that position, I step on someone's foot and I roll my ankle. Maybe nothing happens now,
Yeah.
right? I have the flexibility, I have the strength. So training injury prevention isn't just about efficiency, it's also about being strong in positions that would normally cause an injury. So
Yeah.
that's called training injured positions. One of my favorite quotes, and you know it because it was from Dr. Spina. I learned this years ago, and it's still one of my favorite quotes when it comes to injuries, is you will always regret not training the position you get injured in.
Yeah.
So mobility is about what? Having full range of motion in all your joints and having strength, some form of strength in all those ranges of motion. So
Yeah.
that way, if your body gets exposed to positions that are suboptimal or non-optimal, the body has experience being there, right? So
Yeah.
efficiency, you're always chasing optimal. Injury prevention is, okay, let's train the suboptimal and the non-optimal positions and let's build some strength there.
Okay.
So that's how I view injury prevention is we're going to work efficiency, but in the background, we're also going to make sure our body is strong in vulnerable positions.
Able to take the load in those areas that are weakest.
That's the general concept. The specifics for each person and each joint, that's going to vary. So I can't say do these. Sorry, guys, there's no hack coming.
Yeah.
They were like waiting for here's the 3 exercises you can do. When we finish the episode, I'll tell you the hack.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was like trying to think of all different questions because especially during this whole conversation too, all my questions were the deeper going into it type questions, which I knew wouldn't be great for this. But yeah, it is unfortunate that as far as when the injury happens, there is other than seeking professionals' help, right?
You got to seek
Unless you yourself are
professional.
willing to try and go down that route and learn everything, which takes years, right? Like there's no other way around it. And then on top of that, I like how you mentioned there's injuries you can prevent and then there's injuries you can't prevent. For me, the injuries that took me out of the game weren't injuries I could prevent. They're injuries I couldn't. Broken wrists. Just fall the wrong way and the bone breaks. I fall from a high enough point, right?
I disagree. You got to learn how to fall. You stuck. All joking aside, like even learning how to fall. I know when I did jujitsu, one of the first lessons they taught us is, when you fall, don't ever stick out your hand. They taught us how to break fall. They taught us how to roll, tuck and roll. So that is actually
I see where you're going with it. Yeah. Because even then, because the way I broke mine was I went up for a dunk, got caught on the rim, I fell backwards. So it was either my face or it was my arms outstretched.
No, disagree. You needed a 45-inch vertical.
that would be the prevention. Not getting caught on the rim. Not getting caught on the rim.
You needed a 50-inch vertical.
That one, and then concussion, yeah. But then concussions. I had a concussion going in, and so my one injury that was my biggest problem that would have been the career ender was the shoulder, and then you fixed it up, and that's why I went down my path, right? Because I wanted to learn this and help other athletes. That was fixable and also preventable. Arguably, right, my other injuries were preventable. Proper communication within the team, not getting hit by my own teammate on a screen because he's not watching where I am. I can't see behind me.
Yeah.
Getting hit right perfectly on the back of the head by his chin because he's 7 foot. And all these different things. But yeah, and then going on the mental side of it, it affects athletes all the time.
100%. There's a direct correlation between injuries and mental health where I know a lot of colleges will, and I know at the pro level they do this as well, is when an athlete gets injured, they will actually have them work with the sports psychologist through the process of rehab because they know, like, wait a second, how their mental game is going to be affected. So one last thing I want to go over for parents, because maybe you're like, well, my kid's only 9 years old and he's not at that level yet where there's high risk of injury. you're not gonna. There's not that many 9-year-olds who have explosive power. They're gonna, completely destroy your kid, right?
Yeah.
But I will say this: one of the things you got to be very careful for is the type of coaching that your kid's being exposed to.
Yeah.
Every coach, we understand, like, we want our kids to work hard, and even me, I'm always trying to push the kids, but there has to be a balance, right?
Yeah.
So if you're having your 9-year-old playing travel baseball and they're having him pitch like crazy, right? There, at that point, there's certain things we can do to prevent injuries, right?
Yeah.
Overuse injuries. So before puberty, actually, I don't even want to say before puberty. I would say all the way until, for men, I know it's around 25 years old. The body's constantly developing. For women, it's a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But I'm not in a hurry to like just push my body more and more volume, more and more and more. Because we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that if you're making all these withdrawals from your body and you're not making the deposits, you're pretty much ticking time bomb.
Yeah, and especially for kids at that age,
Yeah.
even if their body is able to recover, right? You don't want to teach the bad habits
Correct.
because they're at that's the age where everything gets they absorb it all.
Yeah.
So if you throw the correct habits, the correct forms, the proper techniques, right, and things that can make them an elite athlete too,
Yeah.
at that age, even better. Don't just kind of throw it to the side and be like, oh, they're just playing, having fun. At a certain point, right? Because we talked about LTAT. If you guys haven't seen that episode, go watch it. We kind of go dive deeper into the
Long-term
developmental
athletic development.
Yeah.
Long-term athletic development.
But there's certain ages, right? And once they get to the age of the learning where they can actually start getting the rules, really start teaching them the rules, really start. And it's not just the rules of the sport, but the rules of their body. How to start focusing on a little bit of form, start focusing on a little bit of techniques, and try to throw it in there slowly.
Yeah, there has to be a lot more education. I'm a big fan of the self-coaching. I'm biased towards it. I can't be with my athletes 7 days a week, but I want those tools and those principles to be ingrained in their brain.
Yeah.
I don't ever just assume that anyone knows what I'm talking about. But I do this with no exaggeration. 5-year-olds, you see me, I do it. 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
So kids are very smart. We don't give them enough credit. And they're
They'll pick
very
up.
capable of learning how to take care of their body. They know they can do some basic mobility. There's a lot of things we can do preventatively that long term, let's say by the time they're, 16, 17 years old, they're like, I'm used to warming up all the time. I'm used to doing these things. It just makes me
Yeah.
feel good. They don't want to get on the field until their body feels good. So those habits are going to get compounded over time. So start them young, take care of their bodies.
Yeah.
So, and then obviously there's other things. Maybe next time we'll talk about it, not today, but hydration, nutrition, sleep. There's other things we can do to help minimize inflammation, speed up recovery, supplementation. Like, there's a lot of things we can do, but from a physical standpoint and a movement point of view, that's kind of what we wanted to cover today.
Yeah.
So that's all I got. You got anything else for me?
No, I think we dove deeper, even deeper than I thought we would. But yeah, I think
Sweet.
it was great. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you guys soon.
Have a good one.